It's not that deep. Everything love, lust, and life.
Sex. We talk about it so you can get better at it. We can all get better at it and maybe feel a bit happier in the process. It's not that deep. Or is it? Hi, and welcome to our latest episode of Sex It's Not That Deep. I'm here with my husband Andy, and today we're delighted to be joined by Sara Kedge to talk about neurodiversity and sex. In the corporate space, Sara helps leaders with complex people problems to make meaningful change that goes beyond box ticking so they can create inclusive, healthy, and more productive workplaces. With individuals and in her neurodivergent entrepreneurs community, How to Entrepreneuro, she helps people think creatively and create environments where they can thrive, no matter how their brains work or their story or the ways they work. Sara, thanks for joining us and welcome.
You're welcome. It's a pleasure to sit here with you.
So, I am absolutely interested in this subject because I think I might be on this spectrum. I'm one of these people who has watched TikToks and gone, oh yeah, no, I think I might have ADHD. And then the more I've watched, I'm like, oh no, actually, I think I might be quite heavily into the ADHD realm. And it's suddenly coming up in things that we've been talking about, and we've realised that I think it affects our relationship a lot more than we thought it did. And that now suddenly we can name it. We're like, oh yeah, that's something we need to learn about. So I'm really excited to talk to you.
Cool. And you're not alone. There are so many people that are accessing the language of neurodiversity through TikTok and Reels and social media in a way that they've never done before. So there's a whole new generation of humans who maybe have struggled throughout their lives to interact in the world, interact with other people, maintain jobs, maintain relationships. And they're now discovering language and a community of people that resonates with them. You go, this is why. It's brilliant.
Yeah. And it's suddenly like life clicked a bit when I realised, like, things suddenly went, oh yeah, now that makes sense. And now we can work with it. And I think that's really important.
I think that's that's another really important, because once you click with it, you can start unpacking the things that you do to try and pretend to be like other people are, like we're told that we should be. And once you click with it, you then unpack those behaviours and start understanding who you actually are, how you really communicate, how you want to interact with other humans. And once you've started to understand that, you can then communicate that with your partners or partner and in a new way, develop a deeper relationship and connection with each other.
Yeah, it's been quite powerful for us over the last probably only matter of weeks, maybe a month or two, where we've started to think about things differently. And, you know, you've said that you're starting to see this information on TikTok and you've started to resonate with it and think that, yeah, I actually fit into a lot of those behaviors and all of that.
Yeah.
And it's making us think differently about, you know, sex and our relationship more generally. We've been sort of identifying things that we've done for years and only now realizing, do you know what, I can see why we do that, or why that happens, or why we think that way. It's been quite an interesting beginning of a journey, hasn't it?
You were saying runs through everything. It's not just work, it's relationships, it's entire life, isn't it?
Absolutely. And one of the things, so I do work in the corporate space and I do work with one-to-one with entrepreneurs. I make no distinction or differentiation between home and work life when I'm working with my clients, because if something's impacting them on their home and in their relationship, it's going to sort of bleed over into their work or their entrepreneurial lives. If behaviours are bleeding through and it's affecting them in one and the other, it's impossible for you to not deal with one without the other, because they interact with each other. You are a whole person. You are not Sara at work. You are not then Sara at home. You are a whole person. So working with people in a holistic way is really important. And actually, some of the stuff that people struggle with in their business and work lives are resonant of behaviours and difficulties that are happening at home. So, for example, when you're talking about sex and relationships, there's a conversation that needs to be had so that people are being fully consensual and signing up to anything and everything that's happening for them in the home life and in the bedroom. And that's the same when you're working for yourself in a business, or you're working in corporate jobs, you need to have this ability to understand yourself, what your needs are, and be able to communicate those needs to the people you're working with, and then negotiate with them about what's okay for you. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So when it comes to the sex and relationship side, will you say that communication is one of the most common challenges that you see people having?
It's nuanced. So yes, absolutely. Communication is fundamental in relationships because everything should be consensual. Everything should be meeting a mutual need with each other. And if you don't communicate with each other equally, and if you're not saying, what I need from you is this, and I hear what you need from me is that, and then being able to communicate and negotiate an agreed position, then you're going to be at odds with each other, and that's where conflict happens. But within that, there is a need for you to understand yourself. In order for you to communicate what my need is, I need to know what my needs are. And actually, and I'm of a generation before the internet and TikTok, so I grew up without access to online porn. Even so, I've had to grow up through a generation of actually being told this is what women are like. This is how sex and relationships work. And having to unpick what I've been told is true and work out what's actually true and okay for me. And I can only imagine the difficulty that's been amplified with kids and young people who are being told through access to pornography on their phones and on their tablets of this is what sex looks like. This is what relationships look like. And that might not be right and okay for that person. So there is a need to do some of this unpicking and unpacking to be able to understand. I know that EastEnders tells me this is what a relationship looks like. And this is what films tell me relationships look like. And actually that doesn't feel right for me. That doesn't resonate for me. Yeah. And then when you go into the neurodivergent space, many neurodivergent people have different sensory sensitivities. So some people may have incredibly sensitive to physical touch. Some people might have incredibly sensitive hearing or sight. And when you go into relationships with a received notion of this is what sex looks like, this is what relationships. When you go up to your lover or your partner, your loved one, you hug them or you kiss them. And for neurotypical people, that might be okay. For somebody who's incredibly physically sensitive, that might be really difficult and uncomfortable. So that received notion of the act of love and intimacy, as basic as a hug, can be really difficult. So there is a need at that really fundamental level to say, actually, hugging is okay. However, I need to be with you for an hour to settle into my space with you, to transition into this space, for my senses to sort of calm down, for me to be able to tolerate touch.
I'd never thought of that. I'm not a hugger at all. My best friend's a hugger, and I've always found it really, really hard. All the way through uni, he would like to hug, and I'm just like, oh, don't want to do it. Yeah. And I've become a hugger with you, but it's taken time.
I was just going to say that early on when we first met, like we always used to joke that you were dead against public displays of affection and things like that, and we're never an over the top wanting to hug or things like that. But yeah, as our relationship has matured over the years, you've changed, haven't you?
It's taken a decade, though, really, to get into it. A decade to hug.
I think it's really interesting what you're saying about sensitivity there, because we saw a TikTok the other day and it talked about for people with ADHD that the use of blindfolds and things like that is really useful. Now, I'd always associate using blindfolds in sex as being something to heighten the senses, but they were talking about it from the approach of almost dulling down the senses and taking away distractions, and by nullifying one or two of the main senses that we've got, it actually helps concentrate on sex. I think that was the message, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And for some people that's true, and this is where the sort of like the curiosity and experimentation and the sort of almost the permission in relationships to do things in a way that actually work for you rather than the ways that work, because we're told that to blindfold is part of something slightly kinky or something slightly, leading into a BDSM scene. And actually, for some people, being blindfolded, as like you were saying, can be the ability to take away the sense that's really heightened, and it allows the person to then focus on the sensations of the things that are happening to them and with them. And it might be that the act of the blindfold and the suggestion of sexually intimate things going to happen is enough to give them an ecstatic experience. So absolutely.
I think we need to try this more.
And I come from this from a position of, we understand sex to be, and I talk broadly here, there is a received notion that sex is penetration. And sex is, that's it, penetration. And the ultimate end is a penis or a genital orgasm. And actually, there are so many more flavours of ecstasy and pleasure that people don't explore because there's this received notion. And when you unpack that and start thinking about developing intimate connection with people and using different senses to feel love and connection and intimacy and, even ecstatic feelings, that's possible. And for neurodivergent people who may have different sensory experiences, it might be that the penetrative stuff is just not the thing that gives them the pleasure and joy that they need or that they desire. So there is that unpacking, as I'm saying, what makes me feel good? What makes me feel connected to my partner or partners? What makes me feel those joyous, ecstatic experiences beyond what I've been told in porn?
So I love being blindfolded, and this whole thing has just made me realise that actually I close my eyes in sex all the time, a lot of the time anyway. Even when, it's not just sex with the light off. I like to have my eyes closed a lot of the time, and I think that might be a sensory thing for me. And I've never really realised it before. I've always felt a little bit guilty because I feel like I'm sort of, maybe I thought that you'd think I was blocking you out, and that
Well, I can look in the mirror. I wouldn't necessarily blame you.
But it's like, I don't want to be with you. I want to pretend it's someone else or something like that. And it's not necessarily that, but yeah, the fantasy in my head and what's going on is too much in one go, I think.
Yeah, I'm a firm believer as well that 75% of sex is in the brain, because you can physically be there enjoying it, but if you're not present in your own mind enjoying it, you're not going to enjoy it. So your brain has got to be absolutely switched on, turned on, in order to enjoy sex. So anything you can do, like blindfolds or whatever it might be, to heighten that, I think is probably massively underrated. And you made the point, Sarah, that the use of a blindfold is always synonymous with BDSM or something along those lines, and it shouldn't be, should it?
Yeah.
No, absolutely not. And as you say, it's sort of like, it can heighten the sensation. And as Fran said, sometimes the sensation can be too much. Sometimes the physical touch and sounds plus the smells and the visual is too much. So I need to take something out. And that is a really easy thing to do. And going back to the communication thing, Fran, you said that there might, there's a concern or a guilt that your partner might feel that he's being blocked out. This is where the communication comes in. Actually, when I do this, this is what this means. And this is what it's experiencing for me. Yeah. To sort of that will allay your guilt or go some way to sort of removing the guilt for you. And it gives understanding to that person, to your partner.
So this is going back to what you were saying, where you have to know yourself before you can communicate with someone else. Because I hadn't realised that was actually a thing for me until pretty much this conversation, to be honest. I hadn't realised that I need that, and that was a sensory thing for me. And that, yeah, you're right. You do have to know yourself first to be able to communicate properly.
And one of the beautiful things about relationships, and It's one of the things that some neurodivergent people excel at, because many of us work in slightly different ways. We spend time learning about ourselves and understanding ourselves and what our needs are. We are slightly better, or coming from a better place of saying, actually, what I need is this. And when you go into a relationship, there's that growth together. So whether you're talking about sex or intimacy, hugging, kissing, public displays of affection, it's that communication about what you actually need, and holding curiosity, experimentation, playfulness, having permission to get things not right, and then go, actually, I thought I really wanted hugs when I first saw you. What that actually leaves me with is a feeling of being invaded, and that's not about you. It's about me needing to settle into the space, and then I can have physical contact with you. So there's a growth.
I never even considered about that kind of settle.
So some neurodivergent people need to have time transitioning between activity A and activity B. And in our modern world, we are told that we need to go from meeting to phone call to meeting to lunch to next meeting to writing a report to doing this, doing that, doing the other. At home, we get up, we have breakfast, we take the kids to school, we get home, we do the laundry, we then go to work, and we're just expected to do blah, 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 blah. And in reality, there are some people who actually need a little bit of gap to allow their brains to say, you know, I finished taking the kids to school, and that required this amount of executive functioning and this amount of stuff. I need to stand still for 5 minutes and go, what's next? Putting the laundry on. Okay, I'm ready to go. And we neglect that transition time.
Yeah.
In neglecting the transition time, you then are emotionally and intellectually trying to catch up with yourself, which causes stress in the body and the brain. But giving yourself that permission to transition into a space can be enough to... It only needs to be a couple of minutes for some people, and for sometimes a quick cup of coffee will increase your effectiveness and your focus on the thing that comes next.
I think this is true in the bedroom as well, because we talk about scheduling sex, and people are saying about it being, you know, it's not sexy, I've booked it in sort of thing. But actually, to know that it's happening can sort of mentally prepare you for it. And you've sort of reduced that time you need to sort of get comfortable with the idea.
Oh,
and it sort of does the pre-work for you, doesn't it?
We've been given this notion that human beings should be spontaneously aroused and horny and sexy all the freaking time. And actually life doesn't work like that. And not all people work like that.
No.
For some people, the real enjoyment of moving into a sexual experience is the lead up, is the anticipation. So that the act of scheduling it in creates that sensory and that intellectual experience to lead it in. It's not boring. It's considered. Yeah. It's saying, I love you enough, I care about you enough, I desire you enough to make time and protect that time for us.
Yeah.
Definitely. I think we've talked so many times about loads of these different topics, and this is just a whole nother layer to it, isn't it?
Yeah, it's suddenly clicking. We've
talked about scheduling before, but the idea of the speed of transition for people, because even in sex, you know, you will have different stages. If you're having sex for 40 minutes or 20 minutes or whatever it might be, you've still got transitions in there from getting started, getting into it, getting into whatever that main act might be, and then however it finishes and culminates. There's transitions in there, and I'm thinking of us and our experiences that, yeah, sometimes you're quite quick to want to transition to the next thing, and sometimes I do, and we don't always match up on those transitions, and we adapt, and it works fine, doesn't it? But I've never thought about that transition time being different for different people.
And then, so if you're transitioning, if there's a mismatch, that's where that communication bit comes back in. How are you communicating when you transition from one activity to the next activity? Are you giving yourself and each other permission to say, I'm not ready yet, I just need a couple of seconds? Are you communicating, and it doesn't need to be verbal. You can use hand signals, you can use facial signals, you can have little signs or little flags or whatever it is to just communicate with each other as you transition. And then afterwards, are you communicating when, first of all, are you giving each other enough time at the end of sex to transition from that experience, come down, come back into your body, and to a point of going, I'm ready to face the world again. And then are you having a conversation afterwards?
Yeah.
And again, it feels boring, it feels clinical. And actually, going back to what I said in the beginning, relationships and life is about consent. It's about making sure that what we're doing together in the relationship works for both of us. So it needs to have a conversation around, did you enjoy that? What was the best things? What wasn't so enjoyable? What was it about that wasn't enjoyable? Does it need to be slower, quicker? Was it a timing thing? Was it just a right then thing? So that you then build up this real intimacy and this real good understanding about what the person you're in a relationship with likes, needs. It might be that you accidentally brushed along their feet, and that is something that gave them a real heightened sense of joy or ecstasy, and you might never have touched their feet before. So having that conversation at the end and going, you touched my feet and that felt amazing. And then you have something you can then go, actually, would you like to explore that more? How would you like to explore that? So it's that conversation and communication, and to make sure that it's fully consensual, but actually you're helping each other to grow in their understanding of themselves and each other.
I think that's so true. We've always felt that we've done that quite well in terms of talking about sex after, and what worked, what did we try differently this time, how did it feel for you, is it something we want to do more of? And as we've done this podcast, and we recently did a episode on aftercare and talking afterwards and all the things you do, and it's made us, again, it's just sort of heightened it for us, hasn't it, that we'll try different things, and fingers crossed, we're 10 years or so into our relationship now, and we're still, most times we have sex, we're trying something different, and hopefully that will continue for another 10 years at least. But we're still trying those new things, and I think it's interesting how we've become very comfortable now with having those conversations afterwards and almost analysing it, so to speak.
They're important. They really are.
Really important. And they're uncomfortable to begin with, because when we watch films, films and television programs, and long-term relationships just happen. People just know about each other. In reality, you have to make time to have those conversations and develop the trust. And it's a real intimacy to be able to say to the person you're with, actually, this wasn't okay for me. That didn't leave me feeling good. Because that can land in the other person as being, actually, I hurt my loved one. But to be able to develop through time and practice and continually having these conversations, it can be a case of, this person's not telling me to hurt me, and they're not saying I gave them intentional harm. They're saying to me, I want you to know this so you can to love me better.
Yeah. I think actually the conversations where things haven't gone right, sometimes, things haven't been perfect, are the ones where you sort of grow the most as your relationship.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that takes trust, and it takes trust, it takes patience, it takes communication. And for neurodivergent people, because some of our brains take time to process. So, for example, some dyslexic and some autistic people take longer times to understand what's happened, understand what people have said to them, to formulate that into a view, to be able to then communicate that. So having a post-match debrief 10 minutes after the match probably isn't going to be as helpful as leaving it a couple of days or a couple of hours to allow everything to formulate, process, and go, actually, this is what I think about this.
Definitely. So we go out and have consensual non-monogamy with other couples, and quite often it is days later that I can come back and go, especially if I've not had a great experience, I can come back and go, I wasn't keen on this and that and this. This is what this made me feel like. Because at the time, I know I'm not having a great time. It's like not bad, but later on, I can process and go, actually, this is what I didn't like, and it's just an overall feeling in the moment. But then I'm like, this is what I didn't like, and this is how that made me feel. I don't know how I feel it in the moment, isn't it? Because sometimes I'll be like, oh yeah, that was okay, and then the next day I'm like, no, actually, that wasn't okay. I wasn't great.
I think we go through stages with it as well, where we'll have the immediate sort of conversation, and then we might talk again the next day. And yeah, sometimes 2-3 days later, even longer than that, we can then revisit it and almost just keep chipping away at it until I think we're both sort of confident that we've talked through it. We know what worked, what didn't, what we want to do next time. I think that's important, isn't it? You've just got to let things take the time that they need.
Yeah. And I think
maybe that revisiting as well.
Absolutely. And I think there's something in that sort of with CNM, and actually for neurodivergent people, different models of relationships can work better for them, for us, for them, for the community. Yeah. Because the received notion of it has to be one person and another person melded together in a completely exclusive relationship might work for some people. But for other people, that might be that's too limiting. So for some neurodivergent people, having consensual non-monogamy or open relationships or anarchic relationship models works better for them because it fits with their own individual needs. I have a need to be fully autonomous. So although I live, I'm talking hypothetically here, so it might be that I need the autonomy to love this person, and this person, but for different reasons and for different things that they bring to my world. And it's for some people that will give them the sense of freedom and connection into their world, rather than having to shoehorn what I feel I am into this two-person exclusive dynamic. And even so, that might shift and change. So I might today be, do you know what? I feel like I need to have the autonomy to not be confined by a relationship of two individuals. And I might have multiple partners. And then 6 months later, I might decide, actually, I feel more connection and a need for that exclusive connection. And it comes back to that knowing yourself and knowing what works for you and being able to honour that without guilt, without shame, and then to negotiate your way in or my way in and out of those dynamics.
Yeah. I think we've been taught that one person should have everything that we need. You know, that's the box that we are supposed to live in. But if you think about it, one person being able to fulfill every need is a really tall ask. And not exactly something that you think that actually would exist for a lot of people.
No, and actually, because again, one of the things that for neurodivergent people, when we come to think about sexual relationship, there is a crossover, or if you look at a Venn diagram of people that are demisexual or asexual or grey sexuals and neurodivergent, there's quite a large crossover. Because for some of us, actually, the act of sex is not as stimulating and important for us than intellectual connection, emotional connection. That physical connection thing is less important. So for people to having poly relationships, I might have somebody who does this for me intellectually and that for me and emotionally and that for me. So again, when you're talking about thinking about consensual non-monogamy, it's detaching the notion that relationships are just about the physical intimacy. There's also emotional and intellectual intimacy that people can get. As being neurodivergent, it's unpicking that and saying, what do I actually need?
Yeah, I think that's what makes it easier for us to consensual non-monogamy, because I feel like you're my person for the sort of intelligence and the emotional connection, and everybody else is a sexual, that it's a different feeling. And so that probably does make it easier, and we've just come to that naturally. But I think it probably would have been a quicker thing for us to realize if we'd have known more about the way we worked.
I think it's all a big cycle, this, because you talked about at the start, Sarah, that so many people are now learning about this because of the medium of TikTok or Reels or Stories. And I think more people are becoming more aware of themselves or their partners. Because, you've shown me things and then I'll see things and I thought, yeah, I can see how that relates to us and how we interact. And I think that when you then go into what we've just talked about there, where you said that there's maybe a higher proportion of people with neurodivergent traits that will maybe be more involved with polyamory or non-monogamous relationships, that so many people have probably labelled themselves or been labelled by other people wrongly or for the wrong reasons for such a long time. And I think it's probably quite a drastic comment to make, but I feel like the world is going through a change in where people are starting to realise more about themselves, more about others. And there's a big education piece to go for a long time on this, but I think it really does cross over massively into the world of sex and relationships, doesn't it?
And I think the lockdown experience gave people a break and a space from what we were told was normal. And it's given people the permission to not do what I ought to do. And that permission has, for many people, sent them along a journey of, well, now I've stopped doing as I should be doing, and I'm doing things. I feel differently now, and I experience the world in this way, and this feels comfortable for me, and this feels good. So I think lockdown's done a lot for us to help us start the journey, and many people start the journey of, I feel less stressed when this happens in my world. I feel more comfortable when these things are in place. So I think there is a shift. And I think TikTok and Instagram and Facebook with Reels is helping this, because we are having access to more information, and people are self-diagnosing and self-identifying themselves with neurodivergent traits in a way that wasn't accessible before. And that's amazing, because we now have language to describe the things that I find difficult. I now have a piece of language to say, the reason I find this difficult and stressful is this piece of language.
Yeah, it's been transformational for me, I think. I always used to think that I was bipolar because I had these big mood swings. But it's not. It's very much a sensory thing that I get a build up of things, and I need to just sort of, I've realised now how to sort of manage it. Yeah, that's exactly it. Just sort of release. Yeah.
And for ADHD people and some other neurodivergent types, I'm just profoundly dyspraxic, our energy and attention isn't linear. It isn't stable and isn't constantly predictable. So we are told that we should have Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, focus, attention and energy. It's not how my brain works. Not how my energy works. I am absolutely cracking from about 5 o'clock in the morning to 2 o'clock in the afternoon. After that, you'll be lucky. But we're told that we have to work in a particular way and be a particular way. So when we start having this language and understanding that actually it's okay for my energy to do this. And when you understand and accept energy does that, you can then step back and start to ask the question, okay, is there a pattern to this? Is there a rhythm to this energy and attention difference? And it might be that actually your energy is cyclical. If you an estrogen-based body and you somebody who has periods, it might be based around your cycle. If you are a person who has children. It might be attached to the terms. It might be attached to other things that are going on in your life, your diet, your exercise. So when you understand, you can start standing back from that. And again, when that comes back to sexual relationships, you can then go, actually, my darling, sex at night doesn't work for me. Because at that point, I've used all my energy biscuits. The biscuit barrel is empty. What I need at that point is to rest and to do that. Sex for me works in the morning or at lunchtime. Yeah.
He's just said that to me yesterday, I think it was.
Yeah, this is a journey that we're on at the moment, is that, especially as well, because we've sort of changed direction with a few things in our business life as well. And because of that, we've sort of changed the times that we're getting started in the morning. And yeah, I'm exactly that. Come the evening, I just want to go to bed. I don't want to necessarily have sex or do anything that really involves too much brain power. And I think sometimes you're the absolute flipped opposite of that, aren't you?
Yeah.
You want to sit down and start working at bedtime, or you want to have sex at midnight. And I've checked out a couple of hours before that. So that's the journey we're on at the moment, is finding a way of making that work for us better.
Yeah.
And that comes with conversation, communication, and communication from a position of, I love you and I want this to work better. And then it's like, okay, so this is where we're at. How do we experiment with that? How do we turn that into a game? How do we turn that into something joyful and pleasurable and lovely until we find something that does work?
Yeah. Never really thought about lockdown being a time to sort of unplug from the world and just sit with yourself and work out how you are. But it really was for us. It did change our relationship. It did get better as a result of lockdown. We really loved lockdown. I know loads of people hated it, but for us, yeah, it did provide that time that we could devote to each other.
And it was that stepping back for some people, because if you we talk in neurodivergent spaces, there's the concept of masking. So I am as I am in my house, and then I put this mask on, whether that's a suit or makeup or nails or behaviour that I do, to behave in a way that's expected of me in the workplace, in the supermarket, as a parent. I put this mask on me. And actually, when we went to lockdown, I had no need for masks because we were homeschooling. I had no need for a suit mask because I was working at home. So in the unmasking, we were able to then start to understand who our core selves were. And in that space, we were able to start to recognise, actually, it is really stressful for me to go into an office, put a suit on, talk to Karen about her weekend, because really I don't care that much. One of the lovely things about neurodivergent people is we tend to not enjoy little conversations. Chat means nothing. Generally, I'd much rather have an in-depth conversation, a real meet and connection. And actually that stress was taken away from me when I didn't have to go into offices, because I didn't have to talk about Karen about a weekend. And then we were starting to able to then really work out and negotiate with our people in our lives. My partner and I don't live together. So during lockdown, we were navigating relationship at distance, where we weren't allowed to see each other. And that created a really different experience. We had to be more creative and more playful or more experimental. And it was fun. It was fun. We did.
And more purposeful.
Yeah, intentional. It goes back to that thing about planning sex.
Yeah.
Our lockdown dating relationships, we went to the theatre, we went to comedy, we did art classes, we did so much together in different cities. And it was intentional.
That's really cool.
It was purposeful, it was considered, and it actually gave space for a lot of people, myself and my partner included, time to actually go, do I really like you? Are you really the person?
Yeah.
Can I really connect with you in a different way, in a way that doesn't involve me talking about getting the kid to school and whether there's milk in the fridge or not? Reconnect, gave people an opportunity to either reconnect or reevaluate the people that they had in their lives and whether they were meeting their needs.
I think there was a lot of that after lockdown, wasn't there? I think there were a lot of people going, actually, you know what? I'm not that big a fan of you.
Yeah, I think it was. I mean, talking of us, it changed our lives, didn't it? In lots of different ways.
Yeah.
And I know that for so many people, it changed our life for the worse in so many terrible ways. But I can only speak of our experience that, there was so many positives that came out of it. And
we grew.
It was such a marker in time that, it's like a whole generation in itself, isn't it? It's just what was realistically a year and a half or so. But it is such a big marker in people that have grown up throughout that time. And I think TikTok, we've talked about TikTok quite a few times on this episode today. I think that is where it, really started to take off, especially for people that were not in that age 12 to 18 generation, which it was at that point. I think it opened itself up as a platform. And that has then gone on to change the way that Facebook and Instagram behaves and what you see now with reels and stories being such a bigger thing. And then that again is then having this knock-on effect where people are learning more about themselves now with neurodivergence or sex or whatever it might be. There's so much more good information out there as opposed to just trash.
As you were saying, things where it's different.
And actually, as much as there is some amazing, and I'm not on, I can talk about TikTok, but I'm not on TikTok. I don't need another thief of my time. I will get lost in and doom scroll. I don't need that in my world. And as much as I know that there's good content out there, I've seen some absolutely appalling stuff. And I've seen some really harmful and not helpful stuff in the neurodivergent space where people are talking almost exclusively and constantly about the stuff that's bad about being neurodivergent. And it's not the case. There are some things that are hard, and there are also some amazing things. And even the hard things, mostly you can navigate through and around them. And as much as there is some amazing content out there, there is also some stuff that could probably do with a bit more balance.
So that was something I wanted to ask you, Sarah. So you said before that there's a lot of people now that are learning and self-diagnosing about things like ADHD.
Yeah.
Obviously, self-diagnosis in a medical sense is not always seen as a positive thing because you can go onto Google with any list of symptoms and you quite honestly could have absolutely any illness that's ever been known. Is there a danger, or is there any sort of warning you'd put out there to people of how to sort of self-diagnose if they think they might be neurodivergent and haven't really been exposed to the thoughts and ideas around that before?
What people are doing is that they are finding and connecting with things that resonate with them. This explains why this happens in me. And this is why I feel exhausted all the time. This is why I leave parties without telling anybody. This is why I don't answer the phone. This is why this happens. And it resonates. I understand. It's not just me. So I think when people use the language of self-diagnosis, it is almost sort of pushing it too far into a medicalisation. What people are doing is they are finding a new way of understanding themselves. They are giving a piece of language and then attaching to a community of people who experience the world in the same way as they do. And in developing that increased self-awareness, I can manage my life in a different way. I can improve the quality of my life because I understand myself in a different way. Being able to connect with people on social who also identify with the language of neurodiversity, whatever label it is that you do, means that you can tap into, there are other autistic people that struggle with it, and these are the things that they've done to try and improve their life experience. And I think that's amazing. It gives power to people to not just understand themselves, but to really take control of, there are things I can do differently to improve the quality of my being. Yeah.
And this is how I can get a better outcome from interactions. Now I know that this is something that I struggle with. I struggle with conversations with people. I can't read people. So I don't know when someone wants to leave a conversation. It's a really well-known thing, isn't it, Andy? People will be giving off real, I need to leave now vibes. And I'm like, blah, 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 blah. And I get the same thing in sort of sexual situations where if someone wants to lead something onto something more, I don't know. I'm just busy in my conversation loop, and I haven't realized I can't read people's signals. So I literally need people to tell me. And this has become a thing. And now because I know that, I tell people because I do literally need you to tell me if you're not interested or you are interested, because I struggle. Or I'm really direct with people.
Brilliant, because you're giving people the lead, the steer, that it's okay for you to say, I'm interested, or shut up now, I need to leave. So we're sort of going away from this almost Britishness about, well, we can't say I need to leave, you're boring me. Well, actually, you can to many neurodivergent people, because I don't get it either. I don't. One of my personal things is, I sometimes struggle in social spaces.
But also, I can't hold things in my head, so that when I'm having a conversation, if something pops into my mind, I'm like, I need to say that, otherwise it's gone.
And yeah, absolutely. And again, that's that thing, that linear conversation is sort of like, you speak, then I speak, then you speak, then I speak. That's a real neurotypical notion. When you're in a room of ADHDs, it's a bit like alphabetic spaghetti of random statements. And you just talk at different speeds and at different things, and somebody will then say three things, and then one. And at the end of it, you will have followed the conversation. It won't have been linear, but it would have been amazing. And you come away going, oh, that's nice.
Yeah. I think we've just come to that recently, really. And it's really freeing once you know.
Yeah.
Isn't it?
Yeah, I think this just sort of is the catalyst for the next chapter of the evolution of our relationship and sex life. I think is just understanding with this new information and this new way of thinking now, that how do we make that work for us, and how do we make things better as a result of that?
Makes for a deeper bond as well. Yeah, I think.
And when you start to practice that, when you've got this language of ADHD, it's like, this is how my brain works. You then start unpacking that, this is how my brain works, and you then start practicing that communication with your partner and your loved one. And it will be uncomfortable at times, and it will be stumbly and awkward, and you will say things wrong, and there will be things that don't land particularly well. And it's that practicing to then go, actually, it's okay for you to be really blunt and brutal with me. I need that, because otherwise, if you go around the houses, I'm never going to understand that. You need to say, Sara, this is. Or I might have a need for you to go around the houses because I might have a rejection sensitivity. So I might have to. I might say to you, I need you to go around the houses and lead me in really gently, because otherwise my rejection sensitivity will come up.
Yeah, I'd never thought about that. It's totally, completely not me. I'd never considered that. But that's a really interesting problem to sort of come around.
What, rejection sensitivity?
But this leads really nice. Yeah, rejection sensitivity is not something I've ever considered, because I'm so blunt. I'm really blunt with people, aren't I? When I want to do this, let's go do this. Or I'm bored, let's go.
Yeah, absolutely.
I leave parties without telling people.
Yeah, and
I've done so many wry smiles and nodded so ruefully through the last 40 minutes. It's unreal.
Yeah.
And I can tell you why I leave parties now. Because I leave parties without telling anybody. I will ghost a party. I will just get to the point where I've had enough and I will leave.
Yeah.
And that's because...
I took my 3-year-old to one and I just left.
You took the 3-year-old with you?
Yeah. And then I just left. We're like, I'm done with this party now. And she was like, I'm done, because she's 3. And then she was like, wait, I haven't got cake. So I had to run back into this party, go, hi, I didn't tell you I left, but I need cake now. Bye. And that's so I ghosted a party twice.
That's effort. And that's because if we have sensory overwhelms, if we we do more intellectual and emotional heavy lifting on a daily basis than a neurotypical person does anyway. So even before I've left the house, I've thought about more, I've felt about more, because I need to navigate a neurotypical thing and work out what the rules are and how to do that. And when we get to parties, there is a lot of who's here, how am I supposed to be, am I drinking enough, am I eating enough, have I drunk and eaten too much? You then have to do lots of talking to people and dealing with lots of generally quite banal conversations. And at the point when you've had enough, you've had enough. And if I go to the party owner and say, we're leaving now, they will say to you, oh, we're going to cut the cake in a minute. Can't you just stay for cutting the cake? And you're like, no, I need to leave. And then you're then left having to manage their disappointment, their hurt, at a point when you're already at a point of being, I've had enough. And you're now asking me to do more emotional labour for you. So to avoid that additional emotional labour, I just leave. It's easier. It's quieter.
So I'm just thinking of that, in all of that, in the context of when we go to sex clubs as well, because it is exactly that. You get there, do I look okay? Am I eating enough? Am I drinking enough? Don't want to drink too much, but want to drink enough that, you know, I've maybe loosened myself up a little. You're meeting people for the first time for very specific reasons. You've got to make all that effort of having the conversation, keeping it going, being interesting. And then maybe at the point where typically you would be like, yeah, I'm just going to leave the party now. Then you go into a different room and potentially take your clothes off in front of a group of strangers. It's a whole different layer, isn't it?
Yeah.
I don't know how you cope with it, to be honest.
So I've just realised when you were saying about that actually when I leave parties, I'm done with conversation because I struggle with the leaving conversations. So I'm like, I can't be asked to start another conversation because I don't know how to finish it. So I'm like, I'll just go. And it's the same thing. I'm like, I'll just take my clothes off because there we go.
Yeah. Now you say that, it makes me
I just
realise
get naked.
You are always the one that's like, right, I'm going to go in there now and get in the hot tub naked. Who else is coming? It's always you that's generally the one to say
I'm done. I can't deal with that conversation. I'll just get naked. That's my solution.
Yeah.
Don't do that at the wrong party. It'll be awkward at Grandma's birthday.
It's gonna be weird in Tesco.
Yeah. So it is that sort of understand. Again, it comes back to that understanding yourself. Actually, I have a need to overcome this, or to manage my my energy, or my tension, or my needs, and actually doing the leaving the parties when I'm having done. You know, sorry, I've left weddings before they've cut the cake because I'm done. I've been to the pre-drinks and the wedding-y bit, and then there's that god-awful bit in the middle. By that time, I've had enough. No, I'm not coming to the evening do because I'm done. Sorry, I'm done. And making that okay. It's okay for me to look after my own needs and to communicate that's what I need.
These realizations, I've come to so many realizations in this conversation already. I realize that you're right. That once you realize those things, you can communicate them better, and you can sort of set your life up to make those things work better. You've actually got a course on this, haven't you? I've realized I've gone to TikTok, realized I've got really bad ADHD. What do I do? What's your course called?
So it's not a course. It's I have a Holy Cow Hour. So for anybody who is been watching TikTok or socials or anything, or they've had their child diagnosed with some neurodivergence, and they go, oh crap, that sounds a bit like me. I have a Holy Cow Hour where it's you come, you sit with me for an hour, you get to splurge at me and say, this is what I think, this is what's going on, this is what I've seen, I think this is me. And we have a conversation about your neurodivergence and about your self-identification. We can unpick some of that stuff. I can talk to you about what I know around neurodivergence and your flavour of neurodivergence, and then nudge you in the direction of your next step. So it's that real, from that real sort of ball drop moment, it might be me. It's your opportunity to have a conversation with someone and say, is it me? And where do I go next? How do I manage and deal with that? So that's a 1 hour session. It's £99. You get to have the recording. So if you're the type of person who will watch it again, you can. If you're not, it can go into the pile of things you're never going to watch again. I do also have courses on how to manage neurodivergence in the workplace, but that's probably not the one for here.
I think every part of this conversation has come back to that, hasn't it? That I almost certainly would help so many people just to become more fully them, I think.
Yeah.
That's hugely helpful.
Yeah, I think the world's on a bit of a path of discovery with all of this at the moment.
Yeah.
So where can people find you, Sara, if they want to find your details and get in touch?
I'm on LinkedIn, Instagram and Facebook. It's really boringly Sara Kedge or at Sara Kedge. I also have a website, sarakedge.com. So you can contact me in any of those platforms. And yeah, that's how you get hold of me.
Cool. Well, I think that's been an absolutely fascinating chat. And we've talked about things that we've talked about so many times before on this podcast, but in a totally different light. And I think it's been a really, really interesting conversation. I think given the tone and things we've talked about before, shut up, it's time to leave now. But I just want to say to Sara, thanks so much for joining us. It's been fantastic. Fran, any closing thoughts?
No, there is so much for me to unpack and learn about. I think you've taught me so much in so little time that I think I'm just going to keep learning from now on. Thank you so much for your time.
You're welcome.
And thank you for giving me such a new perspective on things as well that I think can only be helpful.
Yeah. You're welcome.
Yeah, superb. Cool. So thank you everyone for listening. As usual, if you're a first time listener, then please give us a subscribe. If you've enjoyed the episode, hit like on there and feel free to go and find us on social media at Coupled. Thanks for joining us and we'll see you next time.
Sex. It's not that deep.